I grew up in Texas. I moved to Louisiana with my mother after her divorce. And in Louisiana, they have good libraries. My school library had, believe it or not, this cookbook. It's with its faux leather cover, and I found out recently that it has been called the first celebrity cookbook. And in it, guess who it's by? Vincent Price, the horror actor. And he was also a gourmand and an art collector. But when I opened this book up and saw, it was a whole new world. It was all about all these major restaurants from all over the world. It included the menus, it included recipes. I just couldn't believe that that world existed. Because for me, fine dining was a rare ribeye and a double stuffed baked tater. So this created a whole new avenue of cooking for me. And I really hadn't done much cooking other than cooking with my grandmother, making pound cakes. So I had no fear. And I looked in there, there was a lemon souffle. Well, shoot, I can do that. And I would start working, developing skills, practicing these recipes. The one thing I already did have that was sort of innate for me was that I always thought about the guest. I always thought about the person that I was cooking for. So if I was making a lemon meringue pie for my favorite uncle, Daddy J, I would think of him as I was cooking. And it was all about cooking with love. If you look over my shoulder, there's a little sign that says, all things taste better with love. And my granddaughter, when she was about 6 years old, bought that for me because that was the one lesson she got from cooking with me. So next, we're going to need to fast forward a few decades and part 2. I moved from Shreveport to Raleigh back in 1987 to attend graduate school. I got my PhD in Victorian literature. Alas, it wasn't culinary science. And I taught at NC State. Now, what happened in 1987 was U.S. News named Raleigh the most popular place to live in the USA. And so it doubled in size in about 5 years. And my Arkansas country boy husband said he couldn't take it anymore. And as a result, we moved from Raleigh to Caswell County. We got 36 acres on Farmer Lake. And it was sort of like Green Acres. I don't know if you remember that 1960s sitcom with Eddie Arnold and Eva Gabor, where they left the penthouse on Park Avenue and moved to the sticks. Well, that's exactly what happened. And I was Eva Gabor. I had never had that experience before. So here we are in May. I'm out of school. And I'm on this property, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. So I thought, I think I'll garden. I'd never gardened before. And as it turns out, a few weeks later, we were trying to finish up the cabin. A few weeks later, I drove down the road into town, and there was a sign, and it said tomatoes. And I turned into the little dirt drive. I drove behind the clapboard house, and there was a beat up old red truck. And with this man standing next to it, he was ramrod straight. He had a shock of white hair and the bluest eyes you've ever seen. And I'm very shy, and I go up there and I said, "Hi, I'm Lucindy. I just moved to the area." And he said, "Hi, I'm R.L. Watlington." And I said, "I'd like to buy some tomatoes." So he held up his little bag, and I put my tomatoes in, and he went, 3 pounds, 6 ounces. And then he weighed it, and he nailed it right, just perfect. 3 pounds, 8 ounces. And so I was sort of in love at that point. And I would come back every few days, and we'd play this same little ritual where I'd put the tomatoes, he would guess. And then finally, I gathered up the courage to ask him the big question. I was so nervous I couldn't look him in the eye, and I just went, you know, I think I want to become a farmer, and would you show me how? And this man never expressed surprise, but he almost did then. And he looked at me for a long time, and finally he said, "What do you do for a living?" Now, I was smart enough to know that if I said, "Oh, I'm an academician and I teach at NC State and I have a PhD in Victorian literature and I won't be farming during the school year," he would have said no. So I lied and I said, "I'm a carpenter's helper." And we made eye contact and he looked at me and he knew I was lying. And I looked at him and I knew that he knew I was lying, but I didn't back down. And finally he said, "Let me look at your hands." I hear you gasping. Yeah. So I go up and I hold out my hands and he turns them over, and here's what you don't know. For the last 5 weeks, I had been pouring concrete, I had been putting in insulation, I'd been hammering up cedar planks for walls, and my hands were cut up, calloused, and my thumb was purple. And he looked at them for a very, very long time, because he still knew I was lying, but something had been going on. And finally he said, "Okay, I'll help you." And that began an 8-year relationship that ended when he died of cancer. But the way it worked was I would help him in his fields. He had about 2 acres, and I would help him tie up his tomatoes. And he would come to my place and he looked at it and said, "You need raised beds." He hooked me up with Mr. Schumacher, the dairy farmer, got the cow dirt. We did all of that together, and he was such a great help. What I learned from RL in those years, precious years we had together, was I found the missing piece, the missing part of the puzzle, the last piece of the puzzle that would help me develop my my culinary philosophy. So I already knew my skills. And I already had my passion. I already was really connected with the guest, and I always had fresh ingredients. But what was missing was my connection with the farmer and my connection with the food and the when, where, how of food. I had no idea what farmers went with. I remember RL lost an entire row of ambrosia cantaloupes because the dang blackbirds would go and they would just peck a hole and then move on to the next one and peck a hole. They didn't even bother eating the whole thing, and it completely destroyed his crops.